video, we're going to talk about how we can plot rational numbers on a number line. So to do this, we're going to have two pieces of evidence. First, we're going to order rational numbers from least to greatest, and then we're going to plot them on a number line. Our learning experience, we've got two examples. The first one actually has two parts. The second one is kind of a bonus example, just in case you need it. And then there's a suggested practice problem at the very end. So, our first example, we have a bunch of numbers, and eventually we're going to want to plot them on a number line. But for right now, we're just going to order them from least to greatest. And the best way to start with this is let's just look for which values have negative numbers. So we see we have a negative 3, we have a negative 2.25, we have a negative 2/3. So if I think about how I could compare all of those, I could say that negative 3 is going to be less than negative 2.5, or rather negative 2.25, sorry, which means negative 3 is going to be smaller than this. Similarly, negative 2.25 is going to be less than negative 2/3. Remember, we could say that negative 2/3 is going to be about the same thing as negative 0.66. Really, the 6's would just repeat on forever, but it's close enough. So that means all of our negatives in order should go negative 3, negative 2.25, and negative 2/3. Now, we also have to do the values that are positive numbers. And those, I think, are going to be a lot easier to order. In fact, if we look at how they're ordered in our selection of numbers, they're already in order. So, we can rewrite them like so. And all we've done is we've rearranged our numbers so that they go in order from least to greatest. Why do we do so? Well, if we want to plot them on a number line, it's going to make it a whole lot easier to figure out where each of our numbers should go. So we're going to draw ourselves a number line. As best we can, it doesn't need to be perfect. We do want to make sure that we put arrows on the end, because that means that it's going on forever in either direction. We'll put 0 right in the middle here. We'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over in this direction, and then we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And notice that my spacing isn't perfect, but it's close enough to where you can kind of tell this is supposed to be to scale. Additionally, I'm going to make sure to number all of the labels in here. That way I know where our values are to make it easier for ourselves. So, now we just have to plot them. Negative 3 is an integer, so that's easy enough to find where that should go. So it'll be negative 3. Negative 2.25, that's going to be a little bit trickier. We know it's going to be in between negative 3 and negative 2. And if we think about positive 2.25, it would be closer to 2. Which means negative 2.25 should be closer to negative 2. About there. It doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to give us the idea. I'm also going to make sure to label it. That way we definitely know what that point is supposed to be representing. Because if you told me that's supposed to be 2.2, or rather negative 2.2, I would believe you. But we know that's supposed to be negative 2.25. As for negative 2/3, again, if we think about that positive 2/3, it would be closer to a whole than to 0. So this is negative, is going to be closer to negative 1 whole. So it would be maybe about there. Now, as for the rest of these, we're going to continue that process. 1 is another integer, so it's not too bad to plot. 2.5. 0.5 means it's going to be halfway between 2 and 3 because it's representing a half. So we can label that here. And 4.5 is the same thing as 2.5, except it's 4.5 instead. So we right in the middle here, right at 4 and 1/2. So what we did to plot our numbers, we first ordered them from least to greatest, and then we plotted them on a number line. We had to draw our number line, we had to make sure our scale looked fairly decent, and then it wasn't too bad to plot with them. We knew what order they were going to have to be in. Now let's say that we already have a number line made. This can sometimes be really confusing for people. So we're going to talk about how we can find a strategy to help us with this. To start with, we have -3 and 3/5. That's the number that we want to plot. So let's just make sure that we write it down so it looks a little bit more like a fraction. Secondly, if we look at our number line, the distance between -3 and -2 is going to be 1 whole, right? Distances are always going to be positive. Yes, this is going to go in the negative direction, but that's okay. Additionally, we have these marks in between here. And if we turn this entire thing into kind of a box, like so, we can see how many pieces this is broken into, and we can count. There's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, what's super useful about that is that this tells us what kind of a fraction is being represented here. In fact, it might even make more sense to label these the opposite direction. So let's do that. We have 1, and since we have this out of 5, that's going to represent 1/5. We have 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, and 5/5, which is just, again, 1 whole. But that's okay. Now, our number is -3. That means that we actually need to be on this side of our number line, but somewhere between -3 and -4. Our fraction is going to be 3/5. So if we start from -3, since we know we're going to have a thing there, we can go 1, 2, 3, and this point right here should be representing -3 and 3/5, because we have filled in essentially 3 out of 5 spots. This is going to look different depending on what your scale is. Sometimes this is going to be out of fourths, sometimes it's going to be out of thirds, sometimes it's just out of halves. Depends on what the problem is, but hopefully this helps you kind of figure out what you need to do. So why don't you try this now? You have 6 values here. They're all between -7 and -4. Plot them on a number line. Remember to order them first, then make your number line, figure out what your scale is going to be, go from there. A couple of the numbers are a little bit tricky to read because they have fractions, but for example, we have -6 and 7/10. We also have -6 and 9/10. Those are both fractions. They're just a little bit funky looking because Google Slides does not like doing fractions. Good luck.